What we're doing for this video is thinking about 2-point anchor angles and rigging with a built-in error. So we're going to challenge the way we think about anchor angles and maybe come up with something a bit new and different to what the traditional way of thinking is. So let's get into it. So what we're covering is we discuss the anchor angle you need for 2-point marginal anchors. So this bit in here, and the focal point is fixed and tied with a knot. So the focal point down here, we're not going to consider any other type of anchors, whether it's a floating, equilet, quad, sliding or magic X. So we'll challenge the traditional thinking that less is better. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the traditional where you have anchor factors or percentages on one side and anchor angles, and as you would expect, the smaller the number, it's closer to 50-50 on each leg of the anchor, and then as the anchor angles increase, you get an increased load up to 1 at 120 degrees. That's what you would expect. This is the thinking that we're going to be looking at and challenging and coming up with this. If we build an error into a 5-degree error or shift or move into our numbers, we get a completely different feel of where our anchor angle should be. Like, let's move on. Hey, I'm Grant Prattley from Over the Edge Rescue, canyoner, caver, skier and climber. Done a lot of rescues, canyon guide, instructor in rope rescue and canyoning, author and illustrator of lots of different books, and consult with various organisations and agencies, and do a heck of a lot of rope rescue and rigging testing. 2-point marginal anchor components. So let's just go through that so we're on the same page with what we're actually looking at. So the marginal anchor is a single anchor point, cannot hold the entire load, plus a suitable safety margin. So several marginal anchors are joined together, so we consider it in that bomb-proof realm, but we need to put multiple bits together to make that happen. So some examples of that could be, ice screws, bolts, some rock anchors, joining together a whole bunch of trees, or it could be a thread, a rock thread or an ice thread. The anchor angle is the V-shaped internal angle formed by the anchor rigging. So this V in here, the factor is, if the load is 1, the factor is the proportion of the load. So it's 0.58. In this case, it's 58%. The focal point is where the rigging from multiple anchor points come together and are joined. And the load is the mass gravity force, that's the static load applied to the focal point down in this direction. Hierarchy of thinking for 2-point anchors. Now it's important to establish what this is. The first thing that I always think about is building quality anchors with sufficient margin for expected worst case. The next thing I do, once I've got some really good anchors in, I figure out how to share the load as equally as possible between the anchor points. And then I consider, but it's not my first two priorities, is if one anchor does fail, what is the outcome? And the reason why it's number 3 is if I can do a really good job of number 1, building quality anchors with lots of margin in them, and number 2, sharing the load as equally as possible, then I should really never get to number 3. It's important to consider this. I've actually done lots of testing on this in 2-point anchor testing in 2021, where I've done over 270 tests with 800 data points. So go and have a look at my website. I'll put a link at the end in the description as well, so you can go and have a look at all that testing that I've done that considers it for various anchors. The fixed focal point that we've got here, as well as other kind of magic equilet and quad anchors as well. So traditional thinking, traditional anchor angle thinking it has these two elements. So the angle formed by the anchors coming together should be as small as possible to reduce the force on each anchor. It's also crucial for the load force to bisect the angle formed by the two anchors so that the forces are equal. So that's what we traditionally think. Keep the angle formed small and bisect it. But those two statements, 1 and 2, are actually opposites. It's really hard to bisect a small angle and keep even loading or equal loading on each anchor. It's almost impossible. So this is what normally delivered out to people to say, hey, in a smaller anchor angle, say 30 and below, is what we want to aim for because it keeps the forces really, really small. However, there is an issue with this because this kind of thinking assumes we are perfect at rigging, that we can perfectly rig it in between a really, really tiny angle and the load does not move around at all. Right, so that's what it's assuming. If we have a look at this here, this is anchor factors, and then you've got 5, 15, 30, 45. It's not really increasing that much. It's nearly 0.5 on each. It's nearly 50-50. Only really when it gets above 75 do we actually get starting to see some overloading. So this is what we're traditionally shown to be correct. This is often what people will be told. Yep, the smaller anchor angle is better, but oh, by the way, try and actually evenly load each anchor. Rigging with a built-in error, so a different concept. So the critical thing we're going to be talking about here is the world is not perfect, and neither are you. We're not perfect at rigging to get equal loading on each anchor, and the load moves around, so it can go left or right. If we rig with a built-in error, we can develop an anchor angle ideal range that does not overload one leg. It's better to be a little bit wrong than a whole lot wrong. So a couple of different scenarios that I've looked at. So the op center shift by 5 degrees. So the grey represents perfectly loaded, and then I've made a mistake with my rigging here and haven't got it perfect. Or off angle move by 5 degrees. I've got my rigging perfect, but the load, people, stretchers, whatever it might be on the end of the rope, have decided they're going to move left or right, whether they're abseiling or climbing, doesn't really matter. They're not perfectly loading these anchors. If we build in an error of 5 degrees into the equations we're using and assume we're not perfect, the anchor angle thinking changes to a 45 to 60 degree ideal range, or what I like to call a sweet spot. So have a look at it here. The blue one in the middle, this one through here, that's the perfectly shared left hand side and right hand side. And if we have a left hand side 5 degree shift or move, that is this purple one here, which looks really different to the blue one. So what this is saying is that one leg of the 2-point anchor system is going to have quite a bit more load on it at a smaller anchor angle if we shift or move 5 degrees, which isn't that much in reality. However, if we aim in the middle here for a 45 to 60 degree anchor angle, we've got kind of the best of both worlds, that we're not overloading one anchor leg too much. However, it allows us a little bit of left and a little bit of right movement in the system. If you go down to as it's represented here, 5, 15 or 30, it's very difficult to be able to keep that nice shared or even loading between the two anchor points. So some conclusions: smaller angles can increase the load. You need to change your thinking about using the traditional smaller anchor angle as better thinking. A smaller angle can increase the load significantly on one anchor leg if you are not perfect. It's easy to get all the load on one leg, which defeats the purpose of having two anchor points. So let's have a look at this. So what I've done is I've drawn in some vectors. So we've got a load vector here of 1, and then for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So the blue vector here is indicating what's going up, which is the resultant vector for the anchors, and then drawing parallelogram lines here from the tip of that, and then drawing in the red vectors here. So the red vectors represent the force on each leg, and in this one where it's perfectly shared, it's 50-50, but as soon as we shift or move 5 degrees, it becomes 0.84 or 84% of the load on the left and 0.17 or 17% on the right. Okay, which is not great. So it doesn't allow any left and right movement when we get our anchor angles quite small. So let's have a look at 90 degrees. Let's look at the other direction. So a 90 degree anchor angle is not okay as well. At 90 degrees anchor angle, you have 0.77 or 77% of the load on one anchor leg if the load shifts or moves by 5 degrees. So the number, from my point of view, the number is too high for a 2-point marginal anchor. So let's have a look at this. So shared, you were thinking, okay, it's getting up there, the loading's getting up there, but 0.71 on each or 71% on each would be okay. But as soon as I shift or move by 5 degrees, I get 0.77 or 77% of the load on one of the legs, which is too high. So let's find that sweet spot. Having some angle in the rigging is a good thing. It allows us to be less than perfect in alignment and still have reasonable shearing. That's a really important point. The ideal range or sweet spot of 45 to 60 degree anchor angle allows us to be 5 degrees off, while loading is 0.65 to 0.66 at worst on one leg. Let's look at the vector drawings for 60 degree anchor angles. Got 0.58 if we're perfect, and then the off center shift or off angle move 0.66 on one side, 0.49 on the other side if we go heading to the left. And at 45 degrees it's pretty similar, as in 0.65 on the left and 0.43 on the right if we do shift or move. The shift or move is exactly the same angle, so it's going to have the same force. Something else to think about here is also what's our minimum and what's our maximum. So I've put it down at 30 as a minimum and 75 as a maximum. So you have some margin for error if you don't judge the anchor angle just right in the sweet spot. If the anchor angle is down at 30 or up at 75 degrees, the loading will not increase significantly. So it'll be 0.68 to 0.7. So don't start with a 30 degree anchor angle as okay. If you get this wrong, the tension increases dramatically under 30. So aim for that sweet spot, 45 to 60 degrees. So let's look at 75. There's the numbers. When we do a 5 degree shift or 5 degree move, we've got the 0.7 and 0.56 on left and right. And at a 30-degree anchor angle, we've got 0.68 on the left and 0.35 on the right. So it's not really overloading one leg too much yet, but we want to use it as our outer buffer, but not use it as our standard rigging thing to do. So testing a theory with load cells, let's head outside and have a quick look where we put a 1 kilonewton load in the system and see what happens when we move the load left and right with different anchor angles. We're looking at 2-point anchor angles, and this time we've got some load cells in place here. So up here we've got a line grip line scale 3, so 2 of them, and down here we've got a Rock Exotica Enforcer. That's just telling us that this is around a 1 kilonewton load, around about 100 kgs lifted up off the ground. Down on the ground down here we've got a couple of small jiggers. It's going to pull the load left and right. So that's the setup. Couple of low stretch VT prussics in here made with Dyneema and Kevlar and polyester, so no stretch in the system. Both these prussics are exactly the same length. It's around 50-50, 0.53 on the left and 0.51 here on the right, so pretty close to 50-50, and that's a really small anchor angle of around 15 degrees. So let's have a look at this one for a start and see what happens when we're going to move it to the left and to the right. So let's move it to the left first. I've gone 5 centimeters down at the base down here, and I've already got 0.6 on this side because I'm moving in that direction, so it's going to load up the one on the right. If I'm moving left, 0.44 on the other. Let me go 10 centimeters down here at the base, 0.72, starting to overload it. I've only moved at 1.7 meters below here. I've only moved 10 centimeters, so about that far, 0.34 on the right. Let me error it to 5 degrees. Right, so there we go, we've got 0.83, 0.24 on the left, 0.83 on the right. So that's, you know, as we have shown on the inside, that's our 5-degree error. So you can see this really small anchor angle, you can hardly move it anything at all. Let me just take it up a little bit more to 20 centimeters to the left. There's 20 centimeters to the left, so 0.92, so 90% of the load on the right, and 0.16, so 16% of the load on the left. So at this point is really hardly worth having a 2-point anchor in place, because one anchor is doing most of the work, and that's a huge consideration when you're doing this. Let's bring it back down to neutral, so about 50-50, 0.52, 0.52. That's going to be pretty close to 50-50, and what we're going to do is we're going to move it in the other direction now. So again, that's about 5 centimeters, so 0.65 on the left. That's 10 centimeters, 0.7, 0.3. 15 centimeters at the base. That's going to be our 5-degree error. As you can see, it's doing the same when I'm moving it in this other direction as well. 0.8, 0.26. Let me take it up to 20, and then 0.9, 0.18. Alright, so 90% of the load's going to be on the left, and hard, you know, like saying between 17 to 18.18 or 18% on the right. So bring it back to neutral. So the thing is, with this really narrow anchor angle of 15 degrees, although traditionally they say, oh yeah, it's better because there's less load, it does not allow you to move easily left and right, and relies on you being perfect. Your rigging's perfect here. I have made sure that both my anchors are at the same height, and that this material here is low stretch, and it's perfectly the same, so I could do a really good demonstration here, but in the real world that's never going to happen. Alright, so it relies on you being perfect, so rigging it perfectly halfway in between on all occasions, never going to happen. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we'll de-rig this and we'll take it out to a wider anchor angle of 50 degrees. Right, so let's get going. Let's have a look at what's going to happen when we move it left and right. So at the moment it's pretty well balanced directly in between. So with a 1 kilonewton load, you've got 0.56 on one side, 0.55 on the other. So really nicely, perfectly balanced in between. So what we're going to be doing is moving it left and moving it right. So let's do that. So that's 5 centimeters on the ground, just a little bit extra on the right, a little bit less on the left, 10 centimeters on the ground, 0.62, 0.51, and 15 centimeters on the ground. And I've worked this out, that is approximately 5 degrees. So 0.66 on the right, 0.49 on the left. Let's take it up a little bit higher to 20 centimeters on the ground, 0.7. So that's the maximum. So you can kind of see there's a really good angle here, so we can go quite a long way off and it's still worthwhile having 2 anchors in place. Right, so that's taking the load out to the left. Let's go back into the neutral position, into there. Now we're going to go to the right. So again, it's evened up, 0.56, 0.56, and now we're going to move it to the right. That's 5 centimeters, 0.61, 0.52, 10 centimeters, 0.65, 0.5, and that's my approximately 5 degree error, so 0.68, 0.48. So that's pretty consistent with what the numbers say. When you work it out with trigonometry. Let's go to 20 centimeters. So starting to get overloaded, 0.73 on the left and 0.45 on the right. Let's bring it back to neutral. Great, and we even up the loading. So as you can see, if you have a greater anchor angle, in this case it's 50 degrees, you have much more leeway left and right that you can travel, right? So that's the key thing. So keeping it between 60 and 45 is ideal. The maths says that, and also when we practically do it here with load cells, it also backs the concept up that we did inside when we looked at the graphs and the maths behind it. Right, so let's head back inside now and have a bit of a sum up of what we've learned. So a bit of a summary back inside now, and just to remind us where we've come from. So we've built in that 5 degree error into our thinking, and we're sort of aiming for that really nice sweet spot, this green part, 45 to 60 degree angles. So worse, if we get that 5 degree error in our rigging, or the load moves by 5 degrees, it's not going to be too high, 0.65 to 0.66, within that range in our anchor system. In summary, for 2-point fixed marginal anchor angles, let's build in an error, assuming we're not perfect at rigging and the load moves around. The ideal range or sweet spot is between 45 to 60 degrees. The maximum range should not exceed 75 degrees and be no less than 30 degrees. Carefully plan and implement the anchor rigging to ensure even loading on each anchor point. It's better to be a little bit wrong than a whole lot. For more information, check out my website where I've written a post on the subject, 2-point anchor angles rigged with a built-in error, and there's the link there. I will put this link in the description below as well, so you can click on that and go straight to the website. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.